Welcome, everybody, and thank you for calling me to this very important conference. My presentation will be a little bit less optimistic than the previous presentation was, as I have to talk about our struggles. And these struggles are not just against the mass dog producers, but also against our authorities, which is a big problem for us. First of all, I'd like to define puppy mills somehow. We should determine that there are the so-called industrial or mass-producing puppy mills or puppy farms, which produce large amount of animals, and there is another kind of not breeder but dog producer, which is the household producer who only decides to have one couple of dogs, and they produce at least 1 litter for the grandchildren, for the neighbors. They always find good owners for the products. These dogs usually stay in the producing country, not like the mass producers' products. What is common in the two kinds of puppy producers, that they have no expertise, they do not carry out genetic examinations, do not have love for animals. So there is no vaccination, there is no antiparasitic treatment. They need the big income, and they don't want to invest money for the treatments. And that's why they don't deal with the demands of the animals. Not in feeding, not in veterinary care, not in any way. Usually there are terrible keeping conditions and litters in every 6 months. The needless animals are abandoned. By needless animals, I understand both the parents who are not useful anymore and those puppies who they cannot sell. We had some puppy mills in Hungary where even the parents were debarcated, which means that the vocal cords were cut by a veterinarian, luckily not Hungarian, who came to the country and made this terrible operation so that the neighbors cannot hear the animals' sounds. My question is, this was a puppy mill. I show you footage later. Whether you would buy a dog from a place like this, where the animals are kept under these conditions. This is another puppy mill where old rabbit cages were used for keeping these poor animals, and of course the products went to abroad. I'd like to share just briefly footage which was made by a Hungarian actor and singer. It was a puppy mill liquidation. Why I showed you this footage, and I didn't want to show all the almost 5 minutes, that this was an old ewe barn, sheep barn. The animals were kept there, and also they were fed with maize, which is not at all suitable for dogs. At least 10 or even more animal rescue NGOs participated in the liquidation process. It has more reasons. A little bit later, I'm going to talk about the reasons why this way of animal keeping started in Hungary. These photos I showed about puppy mills came from the Animal Rescue Service Foundation, who carried out a lot of liquidation. And it's extremely important that the liquidation procedure is made properly so that the animals can be evidences later and a proper police or criminal process can be carried out. Every single animal has to be registered, chipped, and possibly a photo should be made about the animals and the environment. The detailed records are very, very important. Health check and registration of the animal's health status is very important also, because later this can be used during the criminal procedure if there is criminal procedure at all. According to the experiences, poor condition due to the poor nutrition and bad environment can be found in majority of these dogs. In Hungarian, it could be heard that what kind of patella this dog had. The animals are loaded with genetic diseases, hereditary diseases. I don't want to go to details because there will be much better presentation about this topic. But the fashion, the trendy animal production is also a new way when they want to produce double male animals, white animals, pink animals, etc. There are hydrocephalic animals, animals with patellar luxation, blindness, deafness, every kind of puppies were found during these puppy mill liquidation procedures. As there is no veterinary care in majority of these puppy farms, there are a lot of other diseases, and some of them are zoonotic disease, which means that they are dangerous to people as well. And just think it over that some people buys the nice new puppy to the children. So it's not at all the same if the animal is infected with Giardia, or even if it was not vaccinated against rabies, which is a rather frequent situation, unfortunately. There are behavioral problems. I won't talk about that in details because, again, another presentation will be in this topic. These animals don't know the human touch because they are usually touched 2 times a year when they are mated. And they are not accustomed to the sunshine, to the environmental noise. We had a liquidated puppy mill where the animals were kept in the cellar, in banana cardboard boxes, in the darkness, even in cupboards. So they had no idea about sunshine, about bird song. Some of them showed very funny behavioral patterns, and later it turned out that it's so a butterfly and didn't know what it was, so tried to follow and turn round and follow the shadow of the butterfly. So these animals have no experience about the real environment. They have a general fear from human beings, and there will also be presentation about the effects of the early weaning. Under normal conditions and according to regulations, the puppies should not be weaned from their mothers before 8 weeks of age. But usually the puppy mills don't deal with regulation, and they wean the puppies earlier. And another problem is that the milk of the mothers is many times not suitable because these animals are not vaccinated. The mother's milk lack the antibodies that would be needed by the puppies to be protected against the most important diseases, most frequent pathogens. That's another footage just to show some kind of behavioral problems, and I don't talk more about behavior. You can see that this poor white one could be kept in a small cage, no idea how to communicate with the other dog, and can only walk in circles. This has also come from the Animal Rescue Service Foundation. The question is why this way of animal keeping developed in Hungary. It has political and cultural reasons too. In the late 80s and early 90s, there were the political changes, and the traditional system of Hungarian household plots collapsed. It was a tradition to keep a few cows, just some swine for the family, or even to sell the fatteners, to have some rabbits, but they were fattened for sale, some chicken, and this system completely collapsed. But the facilities were there. And that was the time when the Italian traders, dealers coming to Hungary started to organize and to build up the system of puppy producing people. And they started to utilize these old facilities. As you could see, there were dogs in rabbit cages, there were dogs in sheep barns, there were and there are dogs in pig pens now. And I wouldn't say that these people are all criminals, because this is a very bad and old tradition of keeping animals. They think if they just feed them once or twice a day, it's absolutely okay for those animals. You could see that in the footage where I showed the liquidation of the puppy farm, the condition was not bad. The problem is that they were fed with maize, which is not at all suitable for the animals. But people think that it's okay for them. This is, on one hand, a lack of knowledge, and on the other hand, lack of knowledge on the regulations, because these animals should be handled, should be treated according to their demands. And in the puppy mills, there is no chance that these animals can go out for walkies, can have enough movement, can have enough social contacts. They cannot carry out the social activities that they need. The problem is, and that's why I'm a little bit more pessimistic than the previous speaker was, that in Hungary we started to introduce the so-called failure system, which was the registration of the dog breeders. The problem is that not only the breeders, but also the mass producers could register to this system. Because it needs only a login and a password, and we have no capacity for checking. So the people who own failure numbers have no license for breeding, they have just registered to a system which cannot be perfectly or well checked by the authorities. The first level animal welfare authority is the local notary, who many times lack the competence. And a part of this problem, they have too many other tasks. So the animal welfare problems are really not important locally. Another problem is, and before I go to the details, I'd like to tell you that we exactly know that in every puppy farm and every puppy mill and every dealer needs to have a veterinarian to participate in the false documentation and the illegal trade. And we know that there are some 30 or 40 veterinarians participating in this bloody business. When we meet illegal trade, almost always the same names are found there, even if it's on ear cropping or tail docking, even in these cases, the same names come. So the vast majority of the veterinarians do not take part in this bloody business, but the problem is that the veterinary officers are allowed to have private practice too. And usually the one who should check, who should make the inspection in the puppy mill, the same one who is the so-called caretaker, because they don't take care on the animals. They just issue the documents. And this is a big problem because when puppy mill is reported, usually the authority is the veterinary office, and that means that the puppy producers learn about the inspection well in advance. We had a case when the puppy mill was completely emptied. One part of the animals went to a local shelter, and the other one went to a truck that was standing in the neighboring street, and the inspecting authority didn't find but one dog there. When a private person discovers animal cruelty and reports it to the authorities, mainly if he or she reports it to the local notary or to the veterinary officer, this will be an administrative procedure. And if a private person is there, then he will not be informed later about the procedure. And that's why it is much more practical to call an NGO, because if an NGO takes part in an administrative process, there will be clients, and they have to be informed by the authorities about the acts in the given case. The next problem is that in case of criminal procedures, a budget should be ordered to the different parts of the procedure. There is a police investigation part, there is a prosecutor's phase, and there is also a trial at the court, so that the costs of the criminal procedure, of the different stages of the criminal procedure, can be covered. The problem is that there is no budget ordered to these procedures. And this is a big problem, because you can imagine if, for example, a puppy mill is liquidated, then let's say 150 animals have to be placed at different shelters or NGOs. What kind of cost can be raised during such a procedure? But the police can solve the problem. They save money. They don't call a forensic veterinary expert They don't carry out a real investigation. They close in the vast majority of the cases, they close the investigation in lack of crime, so that no money has to be spent on animal cruelty cases. Only the victim could appeal, but the victim is a dog. And this is a part when our Boitar helpline can help the participants, because we usually write a complaint to the prosecutors so that they can order the police to open the case again. And this usually happens, but a few months later, the police closes the case again. So in hardly any cases, there are real investigations in case of puppy mills, in case of animal cruelty. As I have already mentioned, the expenses are almost never covered. Just imagine that last year an Austrian woman was caught with more than 10 puppy mills, and that meant more than 400 dogs to be placed at different NGOs in a couple of weeks. It was not at all easy to make place for these animals, and of course the expenses were terribly high. The animals have skin problems, behavioral problems, socialization problems, etc., etc., and these expenses will not be covered. This is a rather new problem that with the simplicity of the failure system, a lot of people who were banned from keeping dogs in other EU countries came to Hungary and started to build up puppy mills, or even networks of puppy mills here. In the last years, Dutch, German, and Austrian citizens were caught. I wouldn't like to tell you that this is the majority, because the Hungarian people are the majority, but this is not a good solution, that people who were banned, who were forbidden from keeping dogs in other EU countries, can go to another one, not just to Hungary, but also to Belgium or to Slovakia, anywhere, and can start the puppy production again. I think that we should find some kind of solution for that, because this is not good in this way. This was a Dutch dog producer. If you can see, I don't know, that there is a dead puppy in the freezer, not so far from the ice cream. And this lady also had a register number, and she had a permission for exporting dogs to EU countries. This is the same place. And this is the liquidation of one of the puppy mills of the Austrian lady. Should I say lady or not lady? So the Austrian woman. She had mainly Austrian shepherds and border collies and these kind of animals. Other problems are that the pet shops and the customers want as young puppies as it is possible. I have already mentioned that no dog should be weaned from their mothers below 8 weeks. The first rabies vaccine should not be given, is not allowed to be given before the 12th week. The formation, the development of the antibodies 3 weeks. That means that no dogs, no puppies below 15 weeks should be shipped. But the customer wants to have younger ones. And that's why the cooperating veterinarians just certify the vaccination, and they issue false documents with much higher age than the puppy real has. And again, I have to tell that the rabies is a zoonosis, and with the Ukrainian war in the eastern part of our country, there were some rabies cases, so it's not just a game. We had a case. Dutch animal welfare activists realized that underage animals arrived from Hungary many times without vaccination. There were a lot of diseased ones among them. And I got a lot of chip numbers, and based on the chip numbers, we found 6 veterinarians participating in this process. I reported them to the veterinary chamber. The chamber reported them to the police. And I have to tell you that after 2 years of investigation, the police closed this case too, in lack of crime, though it turned out that not hundreds, but thousands of documents were falsified. And even when rabies titers were checked, both in the Netherlands and in Hungary, 3 out of 3 and 5 out of 5 were found to be negative, but the police was not really interested in the topic, so nothing happened. And I'm disappointed, very much disappointed about that. What is very sad that there are so-called animal rescue organizations and or shelters which are not really animal rescuers, but either puppy mills or puppy dealers. Some people found very, very big money in the animal protection bench, and they have a lot of believers. In our last case, there was a so-called shelter and collection place that exported dogs, and it was very suspicious. Again, we got the message from the Dutch that the veterinarian is too far from them, and some ill animals arrived at the Netherlands, and I reported them to the local regional veterinarian, who took blood from the next transport, and 15 animal out of 21 had a negative rabies titer, which means that they have never been vaccinated against rabies, though the vaccination was certified. Have I to say that the police has just closed the examination, the investigation? Have I to tell you that the prosecutor said that no need for forensic veterinary experts in this case? We cannot prove that these animals were not vaccinated. Perhaps their immune system was not suitable. We have been constantly being against the wind and against the authorities, and this is a very, very disappointing thing. What is a relatively new problem, and I think that it would be also worthwhile to examine on European level, that usually after the winter, the Christmas peak season, there is a fallback in January, but this hasn't happened this year. There are secret Viber and WhatsApp groups, so it's not the legal advertisement we mentioned so far, but these are secret groups containing puppy producers and dealers. And they are looking for 1 6-year-old pregnant bitches, which are shipped to the European countries in small groups below 5 as own family pets when they are pregnant. And this is a completely new fashion. And I think that on European level, we should find a solution to regulate this kind of business, because we should prevent this way the puppies of these pregnant witches lose their traceability. Because if they are born in the Netherlands, in Belgium, in the United Kingdom, they will be Dutch, Belgian, and British dogs. And what is funny, that usually the parents come back to Hungary and will be mated there again. So some kind of solution would be needed for this problem. I'd like to tell many thanks for the help and the continuous cooperation to Edina Nemedi, the volunteer of the Animal Rescue Service Foundation. And again, sorry for the loud barking during my presentation. This was the black one on the photo. This is a part of my pack here. Thank you for your attention.